I actually just put up a photo. There's a photo of me with some of the inmates at the time. Most of those convicted felons in there, they never really stood a chance in life because they did this really powerful exercise where the woman who was hosting it did this marvelous thing where she started playing this emotional music in the background. And she said, if you grew up in a neighborhood where you heard gunshots, step forward. And something like 30 out of the 36 people stepped forward. And none of us in the 12 civilians stepped forward. And he said, step forward if you grew up in a household that had any more than 3 books. All of us stepped forward and almost none of them stepped forward. And so I was like, oh my God, none of these people had any education. They grew up in a neighborhood where there were gunshots. The final question was, step forward if you didn't have a father figure in your home after the age of 5. And almost all of them stepped forward.
All right, fellas, I'm joined today by James Swanwick, a guy who I've been looking forward to this conversation because the topic is one that hits home for me personally. It's a topic that's affected many of my friends, my brothers in this community, people in my family, and that is, of course, the topic of alcohol, if you know James. And so I'm sure we're going to talk about other things, but that is really the impetus of the conversation, was his work in that space and the change that he's creating in so many people's lives. So a little backstory on James, though, an Australian-American investor, entrepreneur, speaker, and former SportsCenter anchor on ESPN. It's like, that's such a cool opening line. He is a creator of the alcohol-free lifestyle, which helps successful high achievers, that's all of you guys out there, change their relationship to alcohol. He's also the host of the Alcohol-Free Lifestyle podcast, which I listen to, creator of Project 90, which we may talk about here as well, and that is a program that helps those high achievers get control over alcohol in their life. And this is actually a little fact that I waited to say live when I was recording with you, James, and that is that he's a creator of blue light blocking glasses called Swannies, which we own a pair and owned them prior to knowing that James is going to be on the Front Row Dads podcast. But they are downstairs in my living room right now, and that's really awesome. So
that's awesome. Thanks for representing.
There you are. That's right. I thought about putting them on and wearing them like when I greeted you today, but they're awesome and they're really good quality. Like I've had some real shitty blue light blocker glasses, and these are awesome. I remember when my wife bought them, and she's like, these are the best, and that's why we're buying them. So anyway, James,
your wife has excellent taste.
Yeah, that's right. She does. She does.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here, man. Thanks for making time. Where are you right now in the world?
Right now I'm in London, England. I spend my time between London and Medellin, Colombia, and then anywhere else. And the anywhere else can be Florida, Texas, or my native country of Australia.
Why Medellin?
You know, I've been going there since 2009. It's the city of eternal spring. It's 24 degrees Celsius every single day of the year. It's on an East Coast time zone. The people are great, they're friendly. The cost of living is much cheaper. You can get services very cheap, live like a king or a queen, and you're only 2.5 hours flight from Miami. So I love it. I love the people, the culture, the dancing, the food. And there's a really flourishing expat entrepreneurial community down there right now.
That's really cool. It has not been on my radar, but yesterday I was talking with my buddy Cameron Harold. He does COO work. He wrote a book called Second in Command, and he was in Medellin when we were talking. He was actually speaking to the Front Row Dad community, our private membership group. But and then my cousin Kane went down there and spent some time this year. So I feel like the only time I had ever heard of Medellin was if I was speaking or learning about drug lords. I think I had it as like, I only want to go there if I need to do drugs or try to get into the cartel business. But I understand it's much more than that. And I had a very limited worldview, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I had my annual stop drinking retreat there in January of this year. Had 30 middle-aged American clients all fly down, and some of them were apprehensive before they got on the plane. And by the end of it, it was kind of like the Colombian Tourism Board motto is the only danger is that you won't want to leave. And that was certainly the case with our 30 clients. They absolutely loved it. I took them around, and we did workshops in a hotel conference room, obviously, but then we went and did sightseeing, and we actually met Pablo Escobar's brother, Roberto Escobar. We went up to his museum, and he makes money these days from giving people tour of his brother's life. And, it's very controversial because obviously Pablo Escobar was a menace to society, but in some parts of Colombia, they still kind of worship him or idolize him.
So interesting. Yeah. Well, on that topic, by the way, and I don't want to derail us too far into that world, but when people do, you could call it evil, harmful, I think it's pretty safe to say most would look at what he did and go, oh, that was, like you said, a menace to society. You can also look at that person, like so many people in prison, and say, they have so many incredible skills, just put to use in a way that was a menace to society. But the skill they developed, the ability to persuade, the ability to organize or mobilize, if it was used in a do good capacity, then it is a remarkable story in some ways. The opportunity to step up and take charge and do something with your life is admirable. So while you don't want to tout all of the harmful things, it's kind of cool to look at, well, hey, that's a human soul who might have been misdirected, but look at the skills they had.
I mean, if he didn't kill and murder people and use violence, you would probably argue that he was one of the best CMOs, CEOs, and COOs in entrepreneurial history.
Right.
Because, I mean, he ran a multi-billion-dollar operation, albeit with violence and murder and all that kind of stuff. Of course, he never in 1 million years excuse that. But from a marketing point of view, from an operational point of view, astounding impact he had in the world. Not positive, but an impact nonetheless.
I want to give a shout out to the people also out there doing work within the prisons that help, individuals who have the entrepreneurial and the business owner skills, just again put into action in ways that were harmful. But they're the folks that go in, like Kat Hoke, who created a program where she goes into prisons and she helps rehabilitate, teach entrepreneur and business skills, and what do they call that? The recidivist. Oh, there's a word for it. The rate in which they go back to prison. The word's escaping me right now.
Yeah, recidivism. Recidivism.
Yeah, you got it. It's
yeah.
like that. But the work is incredible. So while 8 out of 10 people might return to prison when they leave, she's flipping it on its head, and only 2 out of 10 are returning back to prison when they go through this program, because now they learn how to put those skills to good use.
That's so interesting, because back in 2018, I went into a maximum security prison in California, a couple of hours north of Los Angeles, and I judged an entrepreneurial competition. So they had the inmates in there.
Yeah, like a Shark Tank.
Yeah. And
was that with the Five Ventures, or?
I actually just put up a photo. There's a photo of me with some of the inmates at the time. Yeah, it was that was a. I mean, we don't need to go down this rabbit hole, but that was an eye-opening experience. I mean, I realized that most of those convicted felons in there, they never really stood a chance in life, because they did this really powerful exercise where I was probably one of about 12 civilians, I guess you might call us, who went in there to judge this entrepreneurial competition. And the woman who was hosting it did this marvelous thing where she had the 12 of us line up on one side of a black line across the floor, and they had about 36 inmates line up against us, right? And she started playing this emotional music in the background. And she said, if you grew up in a neighborhood where you heard gunshots, step forward. And something like 30 out of the 36 people stepped forward. And none of us in the 12 civilians stepped forward. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm starting to get this now. Then she said, righto, step back. And then she said, step forward if you grew up in a household that had any more than 3 books. And all of us stepped forward, and almost none of them stepped forward. And so I was like, oh my God, none of these people had any education. They grew up in a neighborhood where there were gunshots going off. And I think the final question was step forward if you or step forward if you didn't have a father figure in your home after the age of 5. And almost all of them stepped forward again as well, and maybe 1 or 2 from the group of 12 civilians stepped forward. And as she's playing this emotional music, I almost was brought to tears because it changed my complete perception about prisoners and about the whole prison system.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking, wow, these guys never stood a chance.
Yeah.
Here I was growing up in middle class Brisbane, Australia. We weren't wealthy, we weren't poor, we were comfortably middle class. And I went to an all-boys private school, which my father busted his ass to send me to. And I was raised with good morals and good values and a loving family, a big extended family network and great role models. And these guys never stood a chance.
Yeah.
At least that was the view I formed that day.
Yeah, man. So fitting. My buddy Hal texted me this morning, this right here. It says, more good dads equals less crime. He's sharing somebody else's post. More good dads equals less poverty. More good dads equals less violence, less illiteracy, less dropouts, less addiction, fitting for today, less self-harm, less child abuse, less sexual abuse, less mental illness, less homelessness, less teen pregnancy, less government dependence. Just is exactly what we're talking about, is this presence of the Father. And I'm so glad that we went there. I'm so glad that I can see this connection to where I wanted to ask you about your relationship with your father growing up. But James, I want to ask you through the lens of what was great about that I know you have a godson that you are engaged with and involved with. And I'm wondering, what did you learn from your father that you can see showing up now as you have an opportunity to be a father, or call it father figure, right, in someone's life? And also, what might have been a warning, or hey, no man's perfect, and this is what you would change. Your dad really worked hard and he wasn't there, or he was really emotional and lost his temper and you would like to be more cool, whatever it might be. What was the warning and what was the example?
Well, I didn't really truly appreciate what my father did for me until many years into middle age, let's say, and more specifically about 5 years ago. I'm 48 years old as we're recording this. It was probably early 40s, 43, where I had an aha moment and my relationship with my father changed. Now, my father is a great man, very well educated. He was a veterinarian for many years, and then he studied law part-time for a decade, left being a veterinarian and became a Crown prosecutor in Australia, which means he puts away the bad guys. He argues for murderers to get be found guilty and convict them. So very smart intellectual man. But, we grew up in a time in Australia where men didn't talk about their feelings, they didn't open up, they didn't express the way that maybe we do now. And so it was very much stiff upper lip, just get on with it, right? And my father stopped hugging me from about age 8 or 9. And I remember, instead of hugging me, he would start shaking my hand from about 8 or 9 years old. And if you think of an 8 or a 9-year-old now, that's pretty young to start moving from hugging to shaking.
I have an 8-year-old and I can't imagine this.
Yeah. But I remember that shift. And, from age 8 or 9, my dad would always take care of me, but the conversations were always like, how was school? And then I'd get irritated because I was trying to watch Baywatch on a Sunday night. You might remember Baywatch. He'd ask me, how was school? Are you preparing for school tomorrow? I'm like, Dad, I'm watching Baywatch. And then that would cause some kind of conflict, etc. My dad worked very long hours. He busted his ass to make enough money to send me to a private school. And my 2 younger brothers, I'm the oldest of 3, they didn't get that opportunity. They went to a public school because he just couldn't make enough money. And so while he was busting his ass to provide for my mum and for my brothers and for me, there was no love. There was love, but there was no display of affection. There was no talking about feelings. It was just get on with it. And also, I will say this candidly, my mother really wore the pants in the relationship. She had a very masculine energy, and she kind of bossed him around to the point where I saw him very much emasculated. And my father was bald. He lost all his hair, and I grew up making this association that bald men were weak because I saw my mother boss him around and he had a bald head. So I became obsessed with my hair loss in my 20s and my 30s. And I did all kinds of stupid things, like putting stuff on my hair to create the illusion that I actually had more hair than I actually did. And, I had this, and then I finally left the house and I went on and I became a journalist and I went overseas and I created businesses and all this kind of stuff. And the conversations that I would have with my dad over the years when we would catch up on a phone call were just the transferring of facts. How are you? What are you doing? Where are you living? Who are you doing it with? How are you? What's going on? Okay, great, awesome, done. Hang up the phone, talk to him again in 2 or 3, 4 weeks' time, right? Then, about 5 years ago, I did 3 personal development programs back to back. One of them was Landmark Forum. One of them was ELP. And another one was Landmark Forum Advanced. And that's where I had some real breakthroughs.
What's ELP?
And it's a company in California. It's more experiential. It's an experiential version of, say, Landmark Forum. Landmark Forum is very logical and heady, I would submit. Whereas this was more, they send you out into society and you try to take a homeless man for lunch and you call up people that you've wronged and you try to make amends, and it's more experiential, right? Mm-hmm. I appreciate this is a very long-winded answer to your question, but I'm hoping that it's of service to your listener. Yeah.
Speak from the heart, James. Speak from the heart.
Yeah. So I remember I went back to Brisbane, Australia for a little holiday for 2 weeks, and I called up my dad and I said, Dad, can we meet for lunch? And so I went down to the middle of the Queen Street Mall in downtown Brisbane, Australia, and he came out, we met for lunch. And for the first half an hour, we just exchanged facts again, pleasantries. And then I kind of took a deep breath and I said to him, so Dad, I want to have a slightly awkward conversation with you, if I may. And he said, okay. And I said, when I return from overseas and I see you, after I haven't seen you for a year or two, we always shake hands. And when I leave Australia to go back overseas for another year, knowing I'm not going to see you for another year or two, we always shake hands. And that's the way it's been since I was 7 or 8 years old. And I said, candidly, it feels more awkward to do that than if we maybe, and I kind of was very sheepish, was looking down at my feet. And I was kind of wanted to suggest maybe when we haven't seen each other for a while, we might just hug. And I kind of looked up at him. I was so embarrassed. It was excruciating for me to actually say this. And he looked at me and I could tell he was shocked. And there was a big pause. And then he said, okay. And that was it. He said, okay. I went, okay. Okay, great. And then we went back to exchanging facts, right? And almost like we ignored the conversation. And then when I paid the bill and we got up to leave, I was kind of embarrassed. But I remembered I'd watched that TV show Entourage on HBO, and one of the phrases is always coming up on there was, "Want to hug it out, bitch?"
Yeah.
And so I said to my dad, trying to downplay the moment, like 2 Australian men in an Australian society where you don't really show emotion. I said, "You want to hug it out?" And he went, "Okay." And at about 1:30 in the afternoon on a boring old Tuesday in downtown Brisbane, we hugged. And he gave me this little kind of pat on the back, which was almost like a very awkward pat on the back. I could tell he felt embarrassed and awkward, and I did. Yeah. And then I let go, and I started to tear up, and I said, "Okay, see you." And I quickly walked off down the street, and my heart was pounding. It was like this. And I remember thinking, wow, that was intense. And that was a huge breakthrough for me. And I was hoping that it was a huge breakthrough for him. And I have to say that is exactly what it was, because since then, the depth of our conversations is so deep. We now talk about feelings. We talk about how he was feeling when he had to generate money for the family, what he was thinking on his wedding day, what he was thinking when my mother and he got divorced, what his concerns and worries are for the future, about how he feels about getting getting old and facing his mortality. And so now when we talk, the conversations are mostly about feelings and fears and happiness and joy, as opposed to, oh yeah, I did this and then I did this, see you later. So that's been a beautiful experience. And going back to your original question, how has that parlayed maybe into my relationship with my godson? Now I hug my godson and I ask him leading questions like, how are you feeling? How did it feel to go to school today? What did you tell me all the different things you learned at school today? Hey, what did you try at school and fail at today? And what did you learn from that? As opposed to, how was school? What did you do? And then you usually get one word answers. But if you ask, how did it feel? What did you try and what did you fail? And what, then the connection is so deep and so meaningful. So,
well, first of all, thanks for sharing the story, man. It was the perfect length and exactly what we needed to hear. And it's because it's real. And I can relate to it, and I bet you so many others can too. My dad would hug me as an adult, but it was a hug that felt like there was a lot of space in between our bodies, you know? And it was probably 3 years ago that I was standing with my dad in a kitchen at a lake house that we've been going to, you know, for many, many years. And I was standing there and I just said, hey, Dad, I want to talk to you about something. And I brought this up. And I was really uncomfortable, just like you. And I thought, man, you know, what am I doing here? But I wanted to tell him that I want like a real hug. Like, you know, and I was like, this is what I want, Dad. I want this type of hug. So a little bit different than your story, but I wanted it to feel like it wasn't so awkward. Like hugging me wasn't like, let me see if I can tuck my elbow in there. So it's more of my elbow touching you than my chest or my heart. And I wanted like this bear hug that felt like, you know, here we are, father, son. And I think that the message for me, the message I think for many of us is you have to ask for what you want. And you can't go through life, especially as an adult male, being a victim to your father anymore. You might have been a victim as a child in many different ways, you know, from your father or other people. But at some point, you got to stop telling the story about Dad. You got to stop painting the picture of who he was and start contributing to the relationship and what you want it to be. Like, you can lead your dad, right? You can lead your father as an adult. And so quit thinking that it's only his role. Like, it's your role, it's our role too, right?
I mean, that's a beautiful way of saying it. You can lead your father. And that's how I feel I have been doing, or that's what I feel I've been doing for the past 5 years. Yeah. And just to bring it into more recent times, recently there was a very famous sporting event called the Ashes. It's in the game of cricket between Australia and England, and every 4 years they play over in London. My dad loves cricket. He's obsessed with cricket. Anyway, he said to me 6 months ago, James, do you want to go to London and we go to the cricket? And I said, yeah, of course, we'll do that. And then I realized that he was going to buy his own economy flight from Brisbane to London, which if you've taken that trip, it's about 24 hours of flying. And economy on a 24-hour flight is not much fun. Yeah. And I was thinking, you know what? My dad, I remember one of the conversations I had with my dad was he said that in the 1980s, when he was running that veterinary practice and it was only performing modestly, I remember he said to me, he said, James, I remember being so broke in the 80s that customers or clients would come into the veterinary practice and they'd be talking about this wonderful trip they took to Asia or down to Sydney or Melbourne. And I remember thinking, James, I'll never be able to go on a flight again as long as I live. I'll just never have enough money to be able to pay for a flight for me or my family. And he told me that probably about four years ago in one of those deep and meaningful conversations. And so when he said he wanted to come over to London and meet me in London to go and watch the cricket, I thought, I'm going to fly in business class. I'm going to fly in business class. And so that's exactly what I did. Now, candidly, I do a lot of Facebook and Google advertising, and I use an Amex Gold card, which gives me 4 awards points for every dollar I spend. So I've got like 1 million awards points where I can actually get an international business class flight for zero, just for using the awards points, right? And so that's what I did. I didn't pay cash, but I paid using the awards points that I had. And I got him an Emirates flight from Brisbane all the way to London with a stopover. I think it was in Abu Dhabi or maybe in Singapore. Can't remember. And he got business class. And I'll tell you, when I told him, which was 2 months before the trip, every conversation that we had about the upcoming trip for the 2 months before the trip involved questions about business class. It was like, so I was like, so what's this? So do they give you free food? Like that, someone said there's a lounge. Is that right? Is there a lounge? I was like, yes, Dad. When you go in and you check in, you'll be able to go to the lounge. Got it. And there's free food there. Is it? Yep, it's all free food. Got it. Okay. And so when you go on the plane, the chairs go back all the way. Is that right? Like, do they go 3/4 of the way back? Or they go, like, literally, it wasn't about like the amazing sporting event we're going to go to. It was all about the business class flight. Dude, and I realized how big a deal this was for him, because to live in the 80s and him think he's never going to take a flight again, to fast forward, let's call it 35 years into the future, and now all of a sudden he's having his son buy him a business class flight, and he's flying to the other side of the world to meet up with his adult son to go and spend 4 days watching cricket. I realized that was a big monumental moment in his life, and it was.
Great. That's so great, man. I love that. That's I can hear the excitement in your story. So cool, man. It's wonderful to be able to do things like that for your parents when you can. And I've felt that a little bit in different ways throughout my life. And I do think it's good to be able to like pay it back a little bit. Not that that's the whole point, but you kind of flip the relationship on its head. You took, we needed our parents. We needed them to take care of us. You said a couple times, and this will be my last question on your dad, and then I think let's talk about your current work with alcohol. But I wanted to ask about, you said several times that money was a concern. But when I hear veterinarian and lawyer, I don't usually think of like money challenges.
Well, back in the 80s, the practice that he had bought was on the outskirts of Brisbane. So it was a poor choice of business to purchase. And so it didn't do nearly as well as what he thought. Yeah. And it was only in later years that he became a Crown prosecutor. Yeah. And that was when I was in my 20s, and all three of his boys had left the house. Yeah. Plus, he'd got a divorce, so he was just supporting himself. So I don't think money issues were an issue after that point.
Yeah, that's cool. Let's talk a little bit about your work today, James. And there's a lot of places that we can sort of get into this. A lot of launching off points, perhaps. But maybe the first one is, why do you care so much about alcohol? What's your relationship to this topic that you decided to devote so much of your life to helping people in this space?
Yeah. Well, look, I was a socially acceptable drinker growing up in Australia, in the sense that I had a couple of drinks most nights of the week, and on the weekends I would drink heavily, watching sporting events or going out with friends and family. But I never had a rock bottom. I didn't get a DUI. I didn't get arrested. I didn't, make a complete ass of myself. I mean, sure, I made an ass of myself maybe in my late teens or early 20s, but who doesn't? But the point I'm trying to make is that I was not an alcoholic, but I just drank consistently. A couple beers most nights of the week, or a half a bottle of wine, or 3/4 of a bottle of wine most nights of the week. Getting a little buzz, but not really getting drunk. Now,
I can relate to all that.
Yeah. Now, all of that was fine for many years. And then I got to age 35. It was 2010, and I was in Austin, Texas, and I was at the annual South by Southwest Festival. And I went out on a Friday night, and I had 2 Bombay Sapphire gin and tonics at an open bar at one of the parties. And then I went back to my hotel, which is 20 minutes outside of downtown Austin, and I went to sleep. And when I woke up in the morning, I could taste the gin in my mouth, and it didn't taste good. I looked in the mirror, and I just looked tired and weathered, like I had crow's feet and wrinkles. I looked down to my pajama pants, and my fat rolls were kind of like going over the top of the pajama pants. And again, I wasn't like obese. I wasn't rock bottom. I wasn't feeling like a 2 out of 10, but I was definitely feeling like a 5.5 or a 6 out of 10. The way I describe it, I was feeling like blah, just blah. Nothing special, nothing awful, just blah. And next to this hotel was an iHOP, an International House of Pancakes. And I went to this iHOP to have breakfast. And I'm sitting in this iHOP, 20 minutes north of downtown Austin. and it's grey and overcast. There's a highway outside of the window, and I'm looking around, and there are actually obese people eating like all-you-can-eat pancakes and stuff. I remember sitting there going, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing with my life? I'm 35 years old. I'm sitting in an IHOP. I'm kind of hungover from those gin and tonics the night before. I'm 30 pounds overweight. I'm tired, I'm weathered, I'm irritable, I'm foggy. I'm not sleeping great. Alcohol, just get out of my life, just for 30 days. Let's just do a 30-day break and see what happens. And I made that decision sitting in that IHOP right there in Austin, Texas. And I committed to 30 days of not drinking. Now, in those 30 days, I lost 13 pounds. It just fell off me. Just fell off me. I slept better. I noticed I was less irritable. At exactly that time, suddenly I had an opportunity to audition to become a SportsCenter anchor on ESPN. And I had no television experience. It's just a friend of mine who I'd helped out during these 30 days of not drinking knew a producer at ESPN who was looking for an international anchor for SportsCenter, someone with a funny accent like me. And he thought that I'd be really good for it. And so he introduced me to the producer. Because I was clear and energized and focused from not drinking, I went for it. I mean, I was like, I'm flying to Bristol, Connecticut. I'm going over there. I'm going to meet him. I'm going to charm him. I'm going to do the screen test. I'm going to get this gig, even though I had no TV experience. And to my utter amazement, they gave me the gig. I literally was on TV hosting ESPN SportsCenter from, I think it was June. It was about May of 2010. And I was like, damn, this not drinking's pretty damn good. I also met this wonderful woman. She was, excuse my kind of the way I might describe a woman, she was a smoke show, like beautiful. Smoke show, right? Smoke show woman. And she was impressed by the fact that I wasn't drinking. She had a much higher positive energy to her. I realized that I started attracting a higher caliber of person into my life, just in terms of acquaintances, because I wasn't frequenting bars. I started going to a gym. I signed up for a half marathon that also raised money for charity. And I was like, this thing's pretty damn good. So I kept going and going and going. And I got all the way to 2011, back in Austin, Texas, back at that year's South by Southwest Festival. And there used to be a bar called was it the Luster Pearl Bar? Are you familiar with Austin? I think it was called the Luster Pearl Bar in Rainey Street. And I went in there and I ordered
that's 10 minutes from my house.
Oh, is that? Okay, cool. So I walked in there and I went to order a celebratory beer for 1 year alcohol free. And I ordered a Bud Light and I went to put it to my mouth. And at the very last moment, I put the beer down and I just thought for about 2 minutes. And I thought, well, in 1 year, I've landed my dream job hosting a TV show. I've lost 30 pounds. I've got the body nature intended me to have. I've got this smoke show girlfriend. I'm eating well. I'm sleeping well. I'm a much more pleasant person. I'm less irritable. I think I'll just keep going. And I literally put the beer back down and I got the waiter's attention and said, actually, I don't have the beer. I gave him a tip and I walked out. And I haven't picked up an alcoholic drink since. So I haven't drunk one drop of alcohol since 2010. And you asked me, why is this so important? I'll tell you why. Because in those years subsequently, I've created two 7-figure businesses. One of them is a sleep company. You referenced one of the products, Swanny's blue light blocking glasses. And I've created this organization called Alcohol Free Lifestyle. And we've helped tens of thousands of people now to sleep better and have a much better relationship with alcohol. And having a much better relationship with alcohol means saving a marriage, being more present with your children, lowering your blood pressure, lowering your resting heart rate, improving your skin, reversing health challenges, destroying stress and anxiety, creating mental wellness, positivity, positive mindset. And I get all of these stories from people who've stopped drinking as a result of us helping them. And it's just like, my life is so purposeful because I get to make money helping people. And so, candidly, 2015 or 16, when I started this mission of actually turning into a business, I was quite sheepish about it because it wasn't the cool thing to shout on social media, hey, I don't drink and you should not drink too. Like, it wasn't cool. And people were almost looking at me going, what are you doing that business for? And it was a struggle. But then it changed. It shifted. around 2018, there was a big shift. And then especially a year ago, the stop drinking movement just like took off. And that's been
A
reflected.
year ago?
Yeah, I said a year ago, about November, December, just as the pandemic had ended, people's drinking during the pandemic increased. Now they've had a 6 months or a year out of the pandemic, and now they're like, oh man, I'm drinking too much. And then
Right.
suddenly not drinking became not just accepted, but kind of cool.
Yeah.
And that's where I saw a big shift as well. So yeah, that's my story, and that's why I've chosen to build a business around what I know best and why it's so purposeful for me.
Well, I want to share this with you, James, and maybe it'll give us something to chew on for this conversation, but I also want to share it with our guys because I've heard variations of the story that you just shared, and yours is one of them where you have some moment that, you just are done. That's it. It's over. We have guys in the group that had the same realization or similar realization and haven't had drinks in a very long time. My story is that I would have alcohol and then I would realize it was terrible for me and I would quit actually for like a couple years. And then I would say, wait a minute, I feel trapped by not being a drinker. I'm a man of freedom. I want to be able to have ultimate control over my life. I actually felt like because I don't have control over my life, I choose not to drink. Is where it started. It was like, I need to eliminate that completely. Then I would talk myself back into, I'm a more evolved person. I have more control. It would be awesome to have a beer occasionally, right? And I would just start talking myself back into it. And then I would have that beer. And I would have one beer in a night, and I'm like, see, I could do it. And then it was like, it would get more and more and more. And next thing you know, I was having a glass of wine every night. Right? And I was having then 2 or 3 drinks every single night. And I remember at one point, and by the way, so super functional, work, family, like all of it's working, right? Still running, still exercising, all of it. I remember at one time I was like, I think I drank every single day for the last 30 days. And I could even have like 6 drinks and nobody would even know that I wouldn't be slurring. I never had a DUI. I didn't get violent, nothing, right? It was just that. And then I would quit again for like a couple years and then I would do like 90 days on, 90 days off. And it's so funny. And even up until this summer, I went to Europe and I was like, I'm going to have some drinks in Europe. I just decided, right? I'm going to have some drinks in Europe. Next thing you know, I'm drinking every day in Europe. And then I'm thinking about it a lot. And then my kids are asking me questions about alcohol. So, Dad, if alcohol is bad for you, is alcohol good for you or bad for you? I'm like, it's bad for you. I'm like, why do you drink it then? I go, well, it's like sugar. Alcohol is like sugar. This conversation, by the way, happened 2 days ago. Alcohol is like sugar. You know how sometimes you have sugar? I sometimes have alcohol. And it's not really great for you, but a little bit here and there is probably not bad. This is what I'm saying. And by the way, I'm like internally going, this is bullshit, John. You're just literally rationalizing all this to your children. And then Ocean goes, you sure did have a lot of sugar in Europe. And dude, I don't want to drink right now. I want to be done. This timing of this conversation is so important. But the reason I wanted to share that is I wanted to add another reality to the table here as we talk, because I want the men to know that there's all different, processes that people go through. But I know at the end of the day, it's not great for me, but I resell myself on why I think I should be able to do a little bit of it here and there. And so anyway, I share that not necessarily with a question, although if you have insights around it, which I'm sure you do, but I wanted to open up. I don't know, how does that land for you? Is that a common story? Do you hear that all the time?
It is a common story. Yes, it is. A lot of people are stuck on a stop-start cycle, so they'll stop for some time and then they'll start again, often returning to the same level of drinking that they had before they stopped, and sometimes a lot worse. And the challenge with this is that if you do that maybe you don't notice it that much over a couple of years or a few years, But I'm 48. You're 48, John, right?
Yep.
Like, you start to notice that stuff, and when you realize you've got less runway in life than you've already had on the planet, you kind of want the second part of your life to be as healthy and fun and energetic as possible. And alcohol is nothing more than attractively packaged poison. That's all it is. And alcohol's reputation is crumbling. Never have there been more alcohol-free alternatives on the market. Millennials are increasingly turning their back on alcohol. Because of social media and the internet, we now have access to much more information about the damaging effects of alcohol. The reason why I would submit you find it so challenging to stop and stay stopped is in part to do with cultural conditioning. I mean, if you go all the way back to when you were a little boy, John, I don't know your relationship with your parents or whatever, but there had to have been a time when you were young, when you were sitting at a table with grown-ups and they were drinking alcohol and you weren't, and they said something to you along the lines of, "Oh no, you can't drink, John. You only get to do that when you're older." Yes. You may also remember a time where they said, "Okay, you're of an age now. Here, you can have a little sip. Excuse me." And so what they're unconsciously doing in that moment, these adult figures, is they're implanting the idea in little John's mind that drinking is a rite of passage. Drinking is something that you get to do. Yeah. Drinking equals fun. Drinking equals adulthood, and every kid wants to be an adult, and every kid wants to go through that rite of passage. And so we're now unconsciously glorifying alcohol in little John's mind. Remember the opening scene in the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Indiana Jones is going in and he gets the idol and he comes out and the big stone is chasing him, and then he comes out and then he's got the idol and the Nazi holds up the idol and all the tribesmen kind of bow down, and that gives Indy his opportunity to make the escape. That's kind of what society is doing. Someone's holding up alcohol, and we as a society are like those tribesmen bowing down and worshipping at the altar of alcohol. But what are we worshipping? We're worshipping just straight toxins. That's all it is. Like I said before, alcohol is nothing more than attractively packaged poison. There are no health benefits to it whatsoever. Zero. Absolutely zero. This ridiculous study, or these ridiculous studies from the 80s that suggested that a glass of wine a night is good for your heart health, has been debunked so many times. In fact, just last year there was a study of studies that came out from the University of Victoria in Canada. Professor Tim Stockwell was the professor who oversaw this. And what he did was he looked at 100 previously published studies about alcohol, okay? And this involved 5 million participants, right? 5 million participants, right? So he's looking at 100 previously published studies involving 5 million research participants. And what Professor Stockwell's research revealed was that almost all of those study results claiming that a glass of wine was good for heart health were either completely skewed or biased. Completely skewed, biased. That was his actual verbiage in that report. So it's time for us to really educate ourselves and use common sense as well, because deep down we all know it's not great for us, but we keep clinging on to it because of cultural conditioning, right? Including smiling assassins. I say this inside of our Project 90 Stop Drinking process for business owners and executives. There are smiling assassins everywhere. And a smiling assassin is the waiter or the waitress who smiles as he or she greets you as you walk into the restaurant. And they say, "Hey, can I get you a drink? Would you like to just wait at the bar? Hello, would you like to get started with some cocktails?" And they're smiling at you, right? It's also when you host people over at your house, John. People come over and you want to be a great host. You turn into the smiling assassin. You're like, "Hi, James, can I get you a drink? We've got some wine. Can I get you a vodka? What would you like?" Now, your intentions are good, but with a big smile on your face, you're offering your guests poison that has zero health benefits, that is compromising their sleep, which compromises their quality of life, which increases their likelihood of cancer, which increases the likelihood of irritation and fogginess and distraction, which is the source of libido challenges for men and for women, carrying excess body weight. Just a quick reference to drinking alcohol anywhere close to bedtime. You're actually better off drinking alcohol for breakfast than you are anywhere close to bedtime, because alcohol absolutely destroys your sleep. Because here's what happens. You drink alcohol, and what you're effectively doing is you're checking your body in for a night's work. But our body doesn't want to work during the night. Our body wants to rest, wants to sleep. But as soon as you drink attractively packaged poison, the liver and the body now has to work to get rid of those toxins at a time when you're supposed to be in your deep restorative REM phase of sleep. And so even if drinking may help you fall asleep, the quality of your sleep will be severely compromised, which is why you wake up feeling tired and lethargic all the time.
I've heard you talk about in the future, the way that society might refer to alcohol is a lot like cigarettes. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, well, in the 50s, we had doctors on billboards promoting cigarettes, saying, we smoke this brand of cigarette and cigarette's really great for you. And now we look back at that and we just go, what were we thinking, right? It's just the notion that cigarettes could be good for us is just preposterous. And my prediction is that in 2 to 3 decades, 20 or 30 years, we will look back on alcohol with the same level of disdain that we currently do cigarettes. Now, I might be off by a decade. I might be early or I might be late. I don't know. We'll see. But it's going that way, all right? And all of these liquor companies, I wouldn't say they're panicking, but you may have noticed they've all got these 0.0 beers on the market now. Like, get this. This is the most amazing thing. Heineken, right? One of the biggest beer brands in the world. Did you know that their Heineken 0.0 beer accounted for more than 10% of their global sales in 2022?
Stop, really?
That is crazy.
Wow.
10%.
Wow. I've had
That
it. It's
is
pretty good.
I mean, I've drunk it as well, and we can talk about whether, to drink alcohol-free alternatives in a second if you like. But that,
we have to talk about that because I only want to talk about it with our kids because my kids want to drink like alcohol-free beer. And I'm like a little torn because I'm like, am I just conditioning them to have real beer? Or because I even, when I wasn't drinking one time, I had alcohol-free beer. And I think that was a little bit of a gateway for me to get back into regular beer because I'm like, ooh, I forgot how good that was. Now I wanted the one with alcohol when I'm stressed because it'll take the edge off.
Yeah, there is the danger of association there, certainly. Yeah. When I take on clients in our program, I don't make it a requirement that they not drink alcohol-free drinks. They can do it, but I encourage them not to. I encourage them to just go completely alcohol-free and no 0.0 beers as well, because we're trying to rewire the association. We're trying to rewire the mindset. Having said that, I hadn't drunk an alcohol-free beer up until a year ago. I mean, nothing. But there was just such a proliferation of alcohol-free alternatives on the market that I thought if I'm going to run an alcohol-free organization, I'm really going to have to know about this. And so I tested it. I had some alcohol-free beers. It never once triggered me into returning to drinking alcohol. The taste was pretty good, and on occasion I'll just have an alcohol-free beer and it's no big deal. But certainly when I'm taking on clients for the first time, my recommendation to them is not to do that because, then you've got that association. Yeah. Let's get the mindset right. Let's put alcohol in a different part of your life, and then we can look about maybe introducing some alcohol-free alternatives ongoing.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about time, because I've heard you reference this as well, of the time that alcohol takes from our lives. And when I think about the men that we serve, I mean, they're obsessed with trying to buy back their time. They're obsessed with efficiencies. They talk about, how do you get it all done? Be a great dad, run a great business, date my wife, right? Do good for society, get the run in that I need to, like all of it. Like just the schedule just starts to feel overloaded very quickly for guys. Can you speak to this part of alcohol? Because it's, for me, it's like the time that I think about it. I looked at it like it would steal moments from me. Like in one time, if I have a beer with somebody and I'm laughing and I'm like, this is such a good beer, let's talk about where it came from and can you taste this? And all the experience of it. Oh, you opened up a wine from where? What region? It's all that. And it's like I'm creating a moment, but I feel like I lose two in the end. So I lose two the next day. I gain one maybe now that I'm like, I got a moment from the alcohol, but I lose two the next day. So it's ultimately, it feels like a deficit for me.
It is. Because think about this, right? Yeah. You're thinking about the drinking that's coming, right? You're thinking about Friday night or the dinner party or the networking event or the NFL game you're going to watch on Sunday. You're thinking about the drinking. So there's an energy leak right there, right? Then you're actually doing the drinking. Okay, so you're spending time, you're doing the drinking. Now, when you drink, you also crave carb-laden foods. So now you're more likely to eat a hot dog or a pack of Doritos or overeat, even if you're pretty clean with your eating, because drinking makes you want to eat more, right? Then your sleep, at the end of that drinking session, you go to sleep and your sleep is now compromised. No question at all. Your sleep is compromised. So now you wake up and now you're recovering from the drinking. Right? You're recovering from the drinking. And that shows up in lethargy, tiredness, irritability, fogginess. And that shows up in you don't fire the person in your company you're supposed to fire, you don't hire the person you're supposed to hire, you don't do the additional deal that you could have done if you had clarity and focus and energy. One deal might equal $15,000 to you. So now that drinking that you had last night has now cost you $15,000 in business revenue. A lot of people don't appreciate, I know we're talking about time here, but a lot of people don't appreciate the true financial cost of their drinking. And I don't care.
Huge.
I couldn't care how much you spend on purchasing alcohol. It's the money that you don't generate because you're recovering from alcohol, right? And so if you're operating in your business at a 6 out of 10 most days of the week because of the after effects of drinking, and you make $1 million in your business revenue, that's pretty good, $1 million revenue business at a 6 out of 10. Imagine what you'd make if you were operating at an 8 or 9 out of 10 with clarity and focus and energy and great sleep, and you were making good strategic choices, hiring the right people, you're in a good mood, you're open to new opportunities, to networking, engaging. I would submit you might make, let's say conservatively, you might make another $300,000 a year. Conservatively. Well, now guess what? You can now argue that your drinking is costing you $300,000 a year. Now, if we take that same number, right, and we go $300,000, I'm going to my calculator right here. Forgive me, I know we're going off track here with the time thing, but if we go $300,000 divided by 365 days of the year, that means that every single day that you drink, you're paying $821.91 of what I call a dumb tax.
Yeah.
Every time you choose to drink, it's costing you $821. In that conservative scenario that I just referenced, right? That's feeling like a 6 out of 10, you make $1 million. Now you're an 8 or 9 out of 10, you make 1.3. That's $300,000 swing. Divided by 365 days of the year is $821. Your drinking is costing you $821 a day, right? And then you're asking about time. You're recovering from the drinking. Now you're thinking about, I shouldn't drink that much. I'm not going to drink tonight. So now you're thinking about not drinking tonight. Then you actually do drink that night, as most people do, and now you're beating yourself up. You don't trust yourself again. And now you've got shame or embarrassment or regret. And now that's an energy sap. And now that leads to you not being as present with your son or your daughter or your wife or your family or your colleagues. And it just on and on and on and on it goes. And because you're not sleeping well, you wake up with shame, regret, irritation, fogginess, lethargy. You skip a workout, so now you're not as healthy. And because you're not as healthy, you kind of eat crappier food. And because you eat crappier food, you kind of want to seek comfort by drinking some alcohol that night, because at least that gives you some relief from the stress and the shame and the embarrassment that you've been feeling. And on and on and on and on and on it goes. And it might not be death right away, but it's death by 1,000 cuts over many years or decades. So that's the alarming kind of jolt that I want to give your listeners. And I don't want to be all doom and gloom on this, but I can tell you I've had a life with alcohol and a life without, and without, it's just so much better in so many ways.
Yeah. Man, so many of my nights in my life, if I just look over the last 20 years, it was like I'd go out, I'd start drinking. If it was a night where I would drink more, I would then question the next day, by the way, how was I behaving? Was I slurring? Was I screaming in someone's ear? You know, if I gave somebody a hug, did I hug too long because I wasn't conscious, right? I started questioning all my behaviors the next day. That would create shame. Then it was the same thing where I didn't have the energy to go do the things I wanted to do. I felt like a terrible dad. I couldn't play with my kids like I wanted to. I didn't take care of my body. And then I would start saying, well, maybe I should have another drink to just like to get back in the game, right? Like it's like, maybe that'll take care of my headache. And it would just snowball. And the shame, the lack of attention to my life, and it's just the price, whether it's time or money or moments with your kids, there's just the cost is big. My hope is this, that whatever a guy decides to do, they're doing it consciously. I hope that they have some awareness around this. And I know, James, that we're up against the clock here, so I want to give like next steps to the guys, and we can kind of land the plane here. So one, let's just say, please tell us about your program, because I want guys to know about, the program that you have, Project 90, or any other resource that they can. If a guy's raising his hand saying, I want more support, I want more insight, I want accountability in this area, tell them about that. And then perhaps, even just now today, can you give them like, this is what I would do right now. This is what I would do today.
Yeah. Well, about Project 90, it's a premium stop drinking process. So essentially we have clients who are business owners, executives, fathers, mothers, mostly in their late 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. That's the demographic that we really support. It's kind of like high performers. This is not an AA meeting where you might be sitting down next to a 17-year-old meth addict who's holding up a gas station. Our clients are articulate, they're educated, they're financially successful, they've got the money piece of their life sorted out, but they just can't get this alcohol piece sorted out. And that's leading into problems with conflict in relationships and not being present with their children and health concerns, etc. The University of Washington conducted a scientific study on Project 90 in Q1 of this year, and the professor, a gentleman by the name of Professor Christopher Barnes, actually phoned me coincidentally last night to give me some off-the-record results, which will be published in February of 2024. And it basically, thank you very much. And basically it shows that people who went through our process drank 98% less than those in the same study who were still drinking. So in other words, it was almost 100% people stopped drinking for at least 90 consecutive days in that process. I'm so excited by that result. If you compare that to AA has a reported 7% success rate. Rehab has less than a 10% long-term success rate. And willpower and motivation is absolutely the most ineffective thing that any of your listeners can do. If you are trying to use willpower and motivation to get long-term power of your drinking habits, you are fighting a losing battle. The way we do it is with neuroscience. So we don't surrender to a higher power. We're not faith-based, although faith can be part of that. We very much look at the latest neuroscience and studies. We help people deal with stress, anxiety, good nutrition, good exercise, conscious communication, a lot of the things that I learned in Landmark Forum and personal development programs. We have New York Times bestselling authors who come in as guest speakers. We have relationship experts like John Gray, who wrote the book Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. We've had Dr. Michael Bruce, who's one of the world's top sleep doctors, come in. And our coaches are educated at Yale, Harvard, Oxford, and Cambridge. And so it's very much, I would say it's like a high-end, well-educated, neuroscience-backed stop drinking process. If you'd like to learn more, you can go to alcoholfreelifestyle.com/project90. I would also invite you to listen to the podcast, Alcohol Free Lifestyle. It's in Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. There's lots of case studies there of people who've gone through it. If you want to do a financial calculator, go to this link right now because it'll tell you how much your drinking may actually be costing you. You might not want to know, by the way, but if you go to alcoholfreelifestyle.com/scorecard, it'll ask you a few questions and it'll calculate the number for you as to how much alcohol is costing you. And if you want to get my free Alcohol Freedom Formula Guide, which would be probably a good first step, go to alcoholfreelifestyle.com/guide. And that's like a 75-page guide where I outline the exact process that I walk all of our paying clients through. So you can get that exact process for free in that guide at alcoholfreelifestyle.com/guide.
James, this is awesome, man. Thank you so much for being here today and having this conversation. And the work that you're doing in the world is important for me personally and my family, and I know many in our community. I'm going to make this ask publicly because I'm actually using this as a chance to promote something as well. So next year for Front Row Dads, we have 6 pillars over the course of the year that we focus on: parenting, marriage, health, and so on, business, etc. For our health pillar, we're going to introduce weekly niche topic Q&A type calls for our paying members. And alcohol for sure is going to be one of them. And I would love for you to be like my guest on that and like meet the guys and do some Q&A. So that's
Done.
the ask.
I'm in.
All right, great. Yes. Thank you. I want people to know that we're going to be doing that. And so members listen to this podcast, and I want them to hear that. And I want to keep bringing this in. And man, I really appreciate not only the work you do, but who you are, James, like how you're showing up, the vibration in which you speak and share. And so I really wish you just tremendous success. And thank you for being with me today and opening up. And I particularly like the beginning of the show too, learning about your relationship with your dad. And that was really unexpected, but really important and helpful. So thank you, my friend.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you very much for having me, John. I appreciate the great work you're doing as well.